My name is Claire Donovan, and I will never forget the exact words that nearly destroyed my wedding before it even happened. Sign this prenuptial agreement today, or the wedding is off. It was 3 days before I was supposed to walk down the aisle. The venue was booked, the dress tailored to perfection, and my heart naively was full of excitement. But when I stepped into the cavernous sitting room of the Kingsley estate, I wasn't greeted with champagne flutes or smiles. Instead, I was met with cold stares and a contract so thick it looked more like a merger agreement than anything resembling love. Richard and Marianne Kingsley sat across from me, two people who had built their empire not just on money, but on intimidation. Richard's voice was calm, almost surgical, when he slid the document toward me. Marianne didn't say much at first. She didn't have to. The condescending tilt of her head, the faint curl of her lips, and the gleam in her eyes told me everything she believed. I had no leverage, no choice, no power. I tried to steady my breathing as I looked down at the document. Prenup. The word itself wasn't shocking. Plenty of couples sign them. But this one, it was different. It was designed to strip me of any dignity, to reduce me to nothing if the marriage ever fell apart. According to their version, if Ethan and I divorced, I would walk away with no property, no rights to anything we built together, and worst of all, potential claims over intellectual property that could endanger my company. Yes, my company. That was the part they didn't understand. The part that made my blood burn as I realized the depth of their arrogance. You see, for years I let people assume I was just a teacher's daughter with modest means. It was easier that way. I lived simply in a downtown apartment, drove a practical car, and never flaunted the life I could have had. Most of my friends didn't even know the truth, that my grandfather, who lived as humbly as any man I've ever known, left me a fortune when he passed. $7 million in carefully cultivated investments. With that, I launched my own tech company, and by 26, it was valued at another $2 million. $9 million, my $9 million. But to the Kingsleys, I was just another woman chasing their son's last name. The irony was enough to make me want to laugh, though in that moment, my chest was too tight, my hands too clammy to do anything but hold myself together. I thought about Ethan, about our late-night conversations over Thai food takeout, about the way he looked at me as if I were the only person in the room, about the warmth in his eyes when he asked me to marry him. Did he know about this? Did he know his parents were planning to blindside me like a hostile takeover? I wanted to believe he didn't. I wanted to believe he was as blindsided as I was. But when Marianne pulled out a Mont Blanc pen from her jacket pocket, already inked, already prepared, I felt betrayal seep into my bones. Because this wasn't spur of the moment. This was premeditated. Claire, dear, Marianne said with her silk-smooth voice, every spouse marrying into our family signs one. It's a tradition, nothing more than a formality. A formality. I bit my tongue so hard I nearly tasted blood. Because what they saw as a formality, I saw as shackles. And here's where I want you to pause with me. Imagine being told that the love of your life comes with conditions, that your worth must be measured against their fortune, that your love story must be notarized and stripped of equality before it even begins. Would you sign? Would you surrender your independence to buy yourself a place at their table? That's the position I was in, staring across that ornate coffee table at two people who thought they could bully me into obedience. But here's the part they didn't know. Money was the only language they respected, and in that language, I was fluent. So I gathered the contract in my hands, forcing my voice not to shake as I said, I'll need to have this reviewed by my lawyer. Richard's brow twitched, the first crack in his composure. Your lawyer, our family attorney, is the best in Chicago. The best for your interests, I said evenly. Marianne's smile faltered. And that was the moment I knew this battle wasn't going to be about signing or not signing. It was going to be about proving I belonged in this marriage as an equal, not as some charity case rescued by their son. When I left the estate that afternoon, the document felt like a lead weight in my bag. My phone buzzed with Ethan's name, but I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to hear excuses. I needed space, silence, and time to remember who I was. Because if the Kingsleys thought they were the only ones with power in this equation, they were about to discover how wrong they were. And maybe you've been underestimated like that too. If so, stay with me. Because what happened next will show you how standing your ground, even when your world shakes, can change everything. The night after that ultimatum, I sat alone in my apartment. The contract spread out across my kitchen table like a crime scene. Each clause seemed designed to remind me I didn't belong. They wanted me erased, minimized, and silenced before I ever said I do. I poured myself a glass of wine, though it did nothing to quiet the storm in my chest. Instead, my mind raced. I thought of my grandfather, the man who taught me that real wealth isn't in your bank account, but in how you carry yourself. He'd once told me, never let anyone sign away your dignity. If they ask you to, they were never for you in the first place. The words rang louder than ever now. But still I wrestled with doubt. What if Ethan truly didn't know? What if this was all his parents doing and rejecting their demands would mean losing him? My heart ached with the possibility. He wasn't just a man to me. He was the partner I had built dreams with, the person I imagined holding my hand when we grew old. Could I risk that for the sake of pride? I picked up my phone, scrolling through our old messages, photos of vacations, late-night confessions. And then I asked myself a question so sharp it almost cut me in half. If Ethan really saw me as his equal, why did I have to fight this battle alone? The truth was painful, but it was there. I realized then that this wasn't just about marriage. It was about sovereignty over my own life. If I caved now, if I signed to keep the peace, I would be signing away more than money. I would be signing away the right to stand tall as myself. So I made a decision. I wouldn't tell Ethan about my inheritance yet. That secret was mine to hold my ace in the hole. Instead, I would prepare myself for the confrontation that was coming. The next morning, I marched into the office of my lawyer, an older woman named Patricia, who had mentored me since my company's launch. I spread the document across her desk and she read it silently for 10 long minutes. Then she looked up, shaking her head. "This isn't a prenuptial agreement, Claire," she said. "This is a declaration of war. No one in their right mind would sign this." Her words gave me clarity. They gave me strength. For the first time since the Kingsleys dropped that bombshell, I felt like I wasn't drowning. But I also knew I couldn't win this battle quietly. I would need to choose my moves carefully to let the Kingsleys underestimate me until the perfect moment came. And maybe this is where I want to pause and reach out to you. Because if you've ever been cornered, if you've ever been told you weren't enough, then you know how it feels to fight silently in the dark. And if you've ever found yourself standing in that same space, let me whisper something. You're not alone. This is a community of people who have been there, who have clawed their way out of doubt and into strength. So if you've ever had to prove yourself when nobody believed in you, drop a comment, share where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button to stay with us. Together, we're stronger than the voices that try to silence us. Back in Patricia's office, I closed the contract and tucked it back into my bag. My decision was made. I would not sign, but I also wouldn't storm into the Kingsleys' house screaming. No, I wanted them to believe they had won right up until the moment I revealed the truth. Because battles like these aren't won in noise, they're won in patience. As I walked out of that office into the bright Chicago morning, the city felt different. The skyline looked sharper, the air crisper, as if it were reminding me that this was my battlefield, not theirs. I wasn't a pawn in their empire. I was my own empire. And though my heart still carried the weight of uncertainty about Ethan, I knew one thing for certain: the Kingsleys had started a game they thought they could control. But I was going to show them just how dangerous it is to underestimate the wrong woman. What they didn't know yet, what they couldn't even imagine, was that their little test would soon backfire so spectacularly, it would leave them wishing they had never tried to break me. 2 nights later, I finally faced Ethan. I had rehearsed 100 conversations in my head, all of them collapsing the moment I looked into his eyes. He was waiting for me at my apartment, leaning against the doorway, like nothing had changed. Like the foundation of our relationship hadn't just been cracked open by his parents' ultimatum. "Claire, we need to talk," he said. His voice was careful, almost pleading. I stepped aside, letting him in, but my arms folded tightly across my chest. "Do you know what your parents did?" I asked, skipping past pleasantries. My voice was steadier than I expected. He sighed, shoulders sagging. "I know about the prenup. I told them it was unnecessary." Unnecessary. The word tasted bitter. "Ethan, they didn't hand me a prenup. They handed me shackles. They wanted me to sign away my rights, my future, even my dignity. And you knew?" "I didn't know it would be that extreme," he said quickly. "I told them you wouldn't go for it. I told them I didn't care about their money. But Claire, they're my parents. They just want to protect me." Protect him, as if I were the threat. I felt my heart twist. I wanted so badly to believe him, to believe that his loyalty lay with me. But his words betrayed something deeper. He still stood in the shadow of their control. Ethan, this isn't about protection, I said. It's about ownership. They don't want me in this marriage as your equal. They want me as your dependent, your decoration. And if you can't see that, then maybe you're not the man I thought you were. His face paled, his mouth opening and closing as if the words were stuck. Claire, please. Don't make this bigger than it is. We can work through it. But in that moment, I realized the divide between us wasn't just about money. It was about values. I had fought my whole life to build myself into someone who couldn't be owned, who couldn't be controlled. And now I was being asked to step willingly into chains, all in the name of love. I couldn't do it. So I told him the truth, or part of it. I didn't sign, and I never will. And if that means your parents hate me, then so be it. The silence between us stretched on, heavy and suffocating. Then for the first time, Ethan said something that truly scared me. If you won't sign, maybe we should call the wedding off? My chest tightened, but instead of crumbling, I felt a strange clarity. This was the moment my grandfather had prepared me for, the moment his words echoed louder than Ethan's hesitation. Never let anyone sign away your dignity. So I straightened my back and looked Ethan in the eye. If that's what you want, then walk away. But know this, I don't need your name, your parents' approval, or their fortune. I am not here for scraps. I am not here to beg. The shock in his face told me he hadn't expected that. He thought I'd plead, that I'd bend, but bending was no longer in me. After he left that night, the apartment felt unbearably quiet. I sat there staring at the city lights through my window, torn between heartbreak and a strange surge of freedom. I loved Ethan. That was undeniable. But love without respect, love without equality, is nothing more than a gilded cage. And I refused to be caged. That night I made another decision. If the Kingsleys wanted to treat me like I was powerless, then I would show them exactly how much power I held. They thought I was marrying into their fortune, but in reality I was protecting something far greater. My independence, my empire, my legacy. And here's where I want to ask you. Have you ever been forced to choose between love and self-respect? Between keeping someone close and keeping yourself whole? If you've walked that razor's edge, you know the pain I felt. And if you haven't, let me tell you, choosing yourself is the bravest, hardest, and most liberating choice you'll ever make. As dawn broke over the skyline, I realized this wasn't just a fight over a piece of paper. This was the beginning of a war over identity, freedom, and what it truly means to stand tall in the face of pressure. The Kingsleys had underestimated me. Ethan had underestimated me. And soon the entire city would see what happened when a woman decided she would rather burn the whole empire down than bow to its rulers. The following week, I found myself standing in the grand marble foyer of the Kingsleys' estate. Their home wasn't just a house, it was a monument to power. Polished staircases curled upward, like the arms of a dynasty. Oil portraits of stern-faced ancestors watched me as though they had already judged and condemned me. Mrs. Kingsley greeted me first, her pearl necklace glinting against her perfectly pressed blouse. Her smile was thin, controlled. Mr. Kingsley wasn't far behind, his presence filling the room with the kind of authority that came less from respect and more from fear. Claire, Mrs. Kingsley said sweetly, "We're glad you came. We assumed you'd want to resolve this matter privately like adults." Privately, like adults, as if I were some child throwing a tantrum. I held my chin high. I'm here because I don't like being manipulated. Let's be clear, what you handed me wasn't a prenuptial agreement. It was an execution order. Mr. Kingsley's eyes narrowed. If you want to join this family, you will follow our rules. This isn't up for debate. The arrogance in his tone sent a rush of heat through my chest. They expected me to bow. They expected me to beg. But instead, I let silence stretch just long enough to make them shift uncomfortably before I spoke again. Let me be very clear, I said, my voice low but steady. I built my company from nothing. I paid my way through college while working 2 jobs. I've faced failure, betrayal, and debt collectors pounding on my door. And through it all, I didn't crumble. If you think a few threats and a stack of paper are enough to scare me into submission, then you've clearly never met a woman who refuses to be owned. For a flicker of a second, I saw something cross Mrs. Kingsley's face, doubt, maybe even respect, but it vanished as quickly as it came. You don't understand, she said, her tone sharp now. Ethan's future is at stake. This family's reputation is at stake. We cannot have uncertainty tied to our name. Uncertainty. That's what I was to them. Not a partner, not even a person. Just a risk to their spotless empire. I almost laughed. Uncertainty. The only uncertainty here is whether your son will wake up and realize he deserves a partner, not a puppet. The words hung in the air like smoke after a firecracker. Mr. Kingsley's face reddened, and for a moment I thought he might explode. Instead, he stepped closer, lowering his voice like he was issuing a decree. Walk away, Claire. Walk away now, and maybe we'll forget this ever happened. Otherwise, you'll regret it. There it was, the threat. And in that moment, something inside me crystallized. I wasn't just fighting for my relationship anymore. I was fighting for every moment in my life when I had been told I was less. For every door that slammed in my face, every room where men with power laughed at women with ambition. And I realized something else too: the Kingsleys thrived on fear. They built their empire on the silence of those too afraid to resist. But I wasn't afraid anymore. So I leaned in just enough that Mr. Kingsley could see the fire in my eyes. The mistake you're making is thinking you can threaten someone who has nothing left to lose. I'm not here for your fortune. I'm not here for your approval. I'm here because I love your son. But if this is the price of being part of your family, then keep your empire. Because I won't pay with my soul. The silence that followed was suffocating. Their eyes bored into me, but for the first time I felt taller than their marble staircase, stronger than their ancestral portraits. I left that estate with my heart pounding, my hands trembling. But beneath the fear was something new: resolve. They wanted me to crawl, but I had walked out on my own terms. And that meant one thing: they had lost control. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, I knew the war had only just begun. The Kingsleys wouldn't surrender easily. They'd push harder, dig deeper, strike crueler. But I was ready. Because what they didn't know yet was that I had been preparing my whole life for this kind of fight. And if they wanted a war, I was going to give them one. The fallout came faster than I expected. Within days, whispers spread through Ethan's circle of friends and colleagues. I could feel eyes on me at every event we attended together. Some offered polite smiles, but most carried that same thin-lipped judgment I had seen in his parents' house. The Kingsleys had begun their campaign, and their first weapon was reputation. One evening, Ethan and I were invited to a dinner hosted by one of his father's business partners. The moment we walked in, I knew the game had changed. Conversations, hushed glances darted, and though the table sparkled with crystal glasses and fine china, the air felt thick with tension. Halfway through the evening, a woman in a glittering emerald gown leaned across the table and asked, "So Claire, what is it you really do? Besides being with Ethan?" The words dripped with venom disguised as curiosity. I smiled, steadying my breath. "I run a company, tech consulting. Started it myself 6 years ago, bootstrapped from nothing. We've just signed our 50th client." Her painted lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "How admirable. But you must understand, some people are concerned. Marrying into the Kingsleys without security measures, well, it does raise questions." There it was, a public jab cloaked as casual chatter. I leaned back, locking eyes with her. The only people raising questions are the ones who believe love should come with a contract. I don't measure commitment with signatures. I measure it with loyalty, sacrifice, and the courage to stand beside someone even when the world whispers otherwise. The table went silent. A few shifted in their seats. I knew I'd just broken their unspoken rule: never challenge the hierarchy. That night, Ethan and I argued again. He accused me of being confrontational, of making things worse. I told him I was tired of pretending, tired of playing the docile fiancé. For the first time, he didn't push back. He just looked at me with a mix of fear and admiration, as though he wasn't sure whether to hold on to me tighter or let me go. But as the weeks passed, I saw the Kingsleys' tactics sharpen. Business opportunities I had been courting suddenly evaporated. Clients pulled out of negotiations. Rumors circulated about my company being unstable, risky. It didn't take a genius to trace the source. And yet with every obstacle they threw my way, I grew stronger. I worked longer hours, rebuilt connections, and doubled down on my business. If they thought they could suffocate me by isolating me, they were wrong. Still, the pressure weighed heavy. There were nights I lay awake wondering if I was strong enough to keep fighting. Nights when the loneliness pressed against my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. But then I'd hear my grandfather's voice in my memory: never trade dignity for comfort. If they try to silence you, speak louder. And so I did. I began showing up at industry panels, taking speaking engagements, writing op-eds about women in business and the toxic structures that sought to control them. My story became my weapon, and slowly I realized something people were listening. Not everyone, not the powerful elite who backed the Kingsleys, but ordinary professionals, young entrepreneurs, women clawing their way up in a world built to keep them down. And for the first time, I didn't feel alone. I know some of you watching have been here too, caught between standing your ground and giving in for the sake of peace. Let me ask you, what would you have done? Would you sign to keep the love, or would you fight for respect, even if it meant walking away? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to hear your perspective, because your stories matter as much as mine. The Kingsleys had tried to turn me into a cautionary tale. Instead, they had handed me a platform. And though the storm was far from over, I could feel something shifting. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was bigger. It was about every voice they had tried to silence. And I was only just getting started. The Kingsleys were clever. They didn't just attack me directly, they went after everything I had built. My office received anonymous calls, hinting that we were under investigation. My employees whispered nervously about our future. And one morning, I opened the paper to find a scathing article questioning my integrity as a businesswoman. The sources were unnamed, but the fingerprints of power were all over it. At first I panicked. I remember sitting at my desk, my hands trembling as I tried to reassure my team. They looked at me like soldiers waiting for their commander's orders, and that's when it hit me. If I crumbled, they would too, so I squared my shoulders, forced a smile, and said, "We've survived worse storms. This one, we're going to walk straight through it." But inside I was breaking. That night Ethan came over. He held the paper in his hands, his jaw tight. "This is getting out of control," he said. "My parents won't stop until you give them what they want." "And what do you want, Ethan?" I asked quietly. He hesitated. Too long. Long enough that I saw the fear behind his eyes. I wanted him to say, "I want you no matter what." But instead he whispered, "I just want peace." Peace. The kind of peace that only came when you surrendered. The kind of peace the Kingsleys fed on. I turned away, tears burning the back of my eyes. "Then maybe you and I want different things." It was the first time I admitted out loud that love might not be enough to bridge this war. The following week, I decided to fight back publicly. I agreed to a televised interview on a business network. Sitting under those bright studio lights, I could feel the weight of the world pressing on my shoulders. But I reminded myself this was no longer just about me. The interviewer leaned forward. "Claire, there are rumors about your company's stability, about your personal motives. What do you say to those who believe you're simply chasing the Kingsleys' fortune?" I took a slow breath. I didn't grow up with privilege. I didn't have safety nets or family empires waiting for me. What I have today, I earned through grit, late nights, and sacrifices that nearly broke me. If people think I'm after anyone's fortune, they haven't been paying attention. What I'm after is freedom. The freedom to love without conditions, to build, without interference, to live without bending to people who think money equals ownership. The room went quiet. Even the interviewer paused. And then softly she said, "That's a powerful statement." When the segment aired, my inbox exploded. Messages poured in from women and men alike, small business owners, single parents, people who knew what it was like to be underestimated, to be told they weren't enough. They thanked me for saying what they had never had the chance to voice. It gave me strength I didn't know I still had. But the Kingsleys weren't done. A week later, I received a letter from their lawyers, a cease and desist accusing me of defamation, threatening to sue if I didn't retract my statements. It was intimidation, pure and simple. And yet instead of fear, I felt something else, clarity. Every step they took against me only exposed how afraid they were, afraid of someone who refused to be controlled, afraid of a woman who wouldn't bow. Sometimes I wonder if you've been in that position too. Tell me honestly, have you ever stood up against someone more powerful, knowing the cost could be everything? Share your story in the comments, because I believe every fight for dignity deserves to be heard. That night, as I stared at the legal notice, I realized something. I wasn't the one trapped anymore. They were. They had built their empire on obedience, and now they were facing someone who couldn't be broken. The war was far from over, but I was no longer fighting for survival. I was fighting to prove a truth the Kingsleys couldn't stand. To face power means nothing when you meet someone who refuses to kneel. The lawsuit threat wasn't just paper, it was a dagger aimed straight at my stability, My attorney called me into his office, spreading the documents across his mahogany desk like a battlefield map. He looked at me with the grim patience of a man who had seen too many people fold under the weight of powerful enemies. "Claire," he said, tapping the letter, "they're not suing you for money. They're suing you for silence. If you retract your words, the case disappears. If you don't, they'll drag this out until you're drained." For a moment, I let the fear wash over me. The thought of courtrooms, of endless legal fees, of my company crumbling while I tried to defend myself, it was enough to make anyone surrender. And maybe that's what they counted on, exhaustion as a weapon. But then I remembered the look on Ethan's face when he whispered he wanted peace. That peace was a coffin lined with velvet, and I refused to climb in. "I won't retract," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "If they want a war, they'll get one. But it won't be fought behind closed doors. It'll be fought in daylight." The next day I called a press conference. Cameras flashed, microphones shoved toward me, the air buzzing with curiosity. I stood there, heart pounding, and declared, "The Kingsleys want to silence me. They want to make an example of me. But I will not retract the truth. If they want a courtroom, then let's open the doors and let the world watch. Because sunlight, as they say, is the best disinfectant." The clip went viral. Overnight strangers were chanting my name on social media, calling me a symbol of resistance against dynasties that thought they were untouchable. Hashtags trended, my inbox overflowed with support. For the first time, the Kingsleys were on defense. But support comes with shadows. My office received threats, anonymous emails, late-night calls, promising I'd regret humiliating such a powerful family. One morning, I found the tires of my car slashed in the parking garage. My staff begged me to hire security, and I did. Still, the intimidation only hardened my resolve. The tension bled into my relationship with Ethan. He was torn between the family that had raised him and the woman who refused to bow to them. We argued constantly, voices rising, silences stretching longer each time. One night he grabbed my hands and whispered, "I don't know how much more I can take." I looked at him, tears burning, and said the words I had been avoiding. "Then maybe you should decide who you're fighting for, me or them." His silence was my answer. In that moment, I realized something brutal, but freeing love without respect is just a leash. And I had never been born to wear one. But here's what I want to ask you, because this is bigger than just my story. If someone you loved couldn't stand beside you when everything was on the line, would you forgive them for their weakness, or would you walk away? Tell me your truth in the comments. I want to know how you see it. The Kingsleys had money. They had influence. But what I had now was momentum, and momentum is a weapon they couldn't control. Every article, every news clip, every whispered threat only poured fuel on the fire. And deep down, I knew the real battle was still coming. Because people like the Kingsleys don't lose gracefully. They strike harder when they're cornered. I was ready, or at least I told myself I was. The retaliation came swift like a storm rolling in without warning. One morning, I woke up to a headline screaming across every major paper, "Claire Reynolds under federal investigation for fraud." My stomach dropped. They hadn't just escalated the war, they had detonated a bomb. I called my lawyer immediately. His tone was clipped, almost brittle. "Claire, these are serious allegations. If the feds pursue this, you're looking at hearings, frozen accounts, maybe worse. It doesn't matter if it's true, the damage is already done." I knew who was behind it, the Kingsleys. They had the kind of connections that could plant seeds in powerful soil and watch them sprout overnight. What terrified me most wasn't the investigation itself, it was the way the world looked at me now. Business partners canceled meetings, clients suddenly needed time to reevaluate, and my employees whispered when they thought I wasn't listening. Fear is contagious, and the Kingsleys knew exactly how to spread it. That night I sat alone in my apartment, the city skyline glowing outside my window. My phone buzzed with messages, some supportive, others venomous. One stood out, "Better quit before you end up buried." My hands shook as I read it, but instead of breaking down, I felt something sharper, something harder, anger. They wanted me scared. They wanted me small. But they didn't understand every time they tried to cage me, I grew wings. I recorded a video that night, raw and unpolished. Sitting at my kitchen table, I stared straight into the camera and said, "You've heard the accusations. Let me be clear, they're false. This is not about fraud. This is about power. When you refuse to bow, those in control will paint you as a villain. But I'm not backing down. Not today. Not ever." I uploaded it not expecting much. By morning, it had 1 million views. People called me brave. Some called me reckless. But most importantly, they called me right. The Kingsleys fired back. They released private photos of me dinners with investors, vacations with Ethan twisted into evidence of corruption. They fed the media narrative so toxic I could taste the bile every time I turned on the TV. And Ethan? He withdrew further into silence. The weight of his family's war was crushing him, and I couldn't carry him anymore. I stopped waiting for his support. My fight had outgrown us both. Still, the pressure gnawed at me. At 3 a.m., I'd wake drenched in sweat, imagining handcuffs clinking around my wrists. I'd picture my employees losing their jobs, my company collapsing, my name rotting in the gutter. I was terrified. But terror, I realized, is a fuel. You can either let it burn you alive or you can forge it into firepower. So I kept moving. I doubled down at work, reassuring my team that we were in this together. I answered every reporter's call, every accusation, with calm, deliberate truth. And slowly cracks began to show in the Kingsley's wall. A whistleblower leaked emails proving they had influenced regulators to open the investigation. Suddenly the narrative shifted. The predator was exposed. But I knew better than to celebrate too soon. Families like the Kingsleys don't fall with one blow. They fight until there's blood on the floor. That's why I want to ask you watching this right now, have you ever had someone spread lies about you just to destroy your credibility? Drop your story in the comments. Because the worst wounds aren't always physical. They're the ones carved into your reputation. And sharing them is how we reclaim power. By the time the news cycle flipped in my favor, I had already steeled myself for the next move. If they wanted me silenced, they'd have to do more than ruin my name. They'd have to break my spirit. And that I promised myself was impossible. The night the whistleblower's emails hit the news, I thought I'd finally bought myself some breathing room. But relief is dangerous. It makes you vulnerable. And that's exactly when the Kingsleys struck hardest. It started with silence. No press attacks, no lawsuits, no shadowy threats. Just quiet. Too quiet. My lawyer warned me. When enemies like them go dark, it means they're preparing something bigger. His words haunted me. Then the phone rang. An unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Claire, the voice purred. It was Margaret Kingsley, the matriarch herself. Her tone was honey, but I could taste the venom beneath. You're a clever girl, but clever girls who don't know when to stop often end up forgotten. The line went dead. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing her voice echoing in the dark, every syllable laced with menace. For the first time, I locked every window, double-checked the doors, left the lights blazing. Because I wasn't just fighting for my reputation anymore, I was fighting for my life. And yet a strange thing happened. The fear didn't paralyze me, it focused me. I realized this battle was no longer about lawsuits or smear campaigns. This was survival. And survival required strategy. I began documenting everything. Every call, every threat, every unexplained car that lingered too long outside my apartment. I built a file thick enough to bury them if I had to. My lawyer called it paranoia. I called it insurance. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. One evening I returned home to find my front door ajar. My chest tightened. Inside, nothing looked stolen, but on the kitchen counter sat a single envelope. No name, no stamp, just one sheet of paper inside. It read, "Last warning." I remember standing there, the paper trembling in my hands, and realizing just how far they were willing to go. This wasn't intimidation anymore. This was escalation. That's when I knew I couldn't fight this battle alone. I reached out to journalists I trusted, people who had already begun circling the Kingsleys' empire like sharks scenting blood. I gave them the evidence I had, emails, threats, the envelope. I burned my bridges with secrecy and chose exposure instead. If they wanted to bury me, I'd make sure the world saw them shovel the dirt. And the world responded. The story exploded again. People demanded answers. Protesters gathered outside the Kingsleys' corporate headquarters chanting my name. Overnight, I went from woman under fire to whistleblower hero. But heroes don't sleep well. Every creak in my apartment, every flicker of a shadow on the wall felt like a prelude to disaster. And maybe it was. Because just when I thought I had turned the tide, I received a message that stopped me cold. It wasn't an email or a letter or a phone call. It was a photograph slipped under my office door. It showed me sitting at my favorite cafe sipping coffee the day before. The angle was from across the street. Blurry, but close enough to see the fear I hadn't admitted to anyone. The caption scrawled on the back chilled me to the bone. "We see you." That's when it hit me, this wasn't just about me anymore. This was bigger. They weren't just trying to silence me, they were making an example. and if I didn't outmaneuver them, someone else would pay the price. Now I have to ask you, because you've been with me through this storm, what would you do if you knew your enemy was watching every move, waiting for you to slip? Would you keep pushing, or would you vanish into silence? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I need to know how you'd survive this. Because the next move I made, it changed everything. When you've been hunted long enough, something inside you shifts. Fear stops being an anchor and becomes a blade. That was the moment I stopped waiting for the Kingsleys' next strike and decided to take the war to them. I started with their weakest point: secrecy. Families like the Kingsleys thrive in shadows, hiding their rot beneath polished marble and expensive suits. But secrets are like cracks in glass, they spread fast once pressure is applied. And I had just the right leverage. Through a friend in finance, I discovered whispers of offshore accounts tied to Kingsley Enterprises, hidden money, tax evasion, and worse, funds funneled to shell companies with connections to organized crime. It was the kind of scandal that could topple an empire if the right spotlight was turned on it. But shining that light was dangerous. If they knew I had this information, they'd stop playing games. They'd go for the kill. Still, I couldn't ignore it. I arranged a late-night meeting with an investigative journalist in a quiet diner outside the city. Sliding the folder across the table, I whispered, "This isn't about me anymore. It's about how much they've poisoned everything they touch." The journalist's eyes widened. "Claire, if this checks out, it's explosive. But you realize once we publish, there's no going back." I nodded. There's already no going back. From that moment, I became both predator and prey. I doubled security at my office. I carried pepper spray, even a small pocket knife, everywhere I went. Every knock at the door jolted me. But beneath the fear was a new current of adrenaline power. For once, I wasn't just defending, I was attacking. The Kingsleys noticed. Their silence shattered into fury. My lawyer received cease and desist letters so thick they came bound in rubber bands. Anonymous callers threatened lawsuits, bankruptcy, ruin. But what shook me most wasn't the noise, it was Ethan. He showed up at my apartment one night, drenched from the rain, his face a battlefield of conflict. "Claire, you have to stop this," he pleaded. "You don't know what you're doing. My family, they'll destroy you. Please just walk away." I looked at him, the man I once loved, and realized he was no longer mine. He was theirs, bound by blood and fear. "Ethan," I said quietly, "if I walk away, they win. And if they win, no one's safe." He stared at me broken, then turned and left without another word. That was the last time I saw him. The following week, the exposé dropped. Headlines blared across the nation: Kingsley Empire built on fraud, offshore funds, and criminal ties. The story spread like wildfire. Stock prices plummeted. Senators called for hearings. Protesters outside their headquarters doubled, then tripled. For a brief moment, I felt victorious. The empire had cracked. The Kingsleys were bleeding. But victories in wars like this are illusions. Because 2 days later, I woke to find a brick hurled through my apartment window, a note attached with duct tape. "You've gone too far." The glass crunched beneath my feet as I picked it up, heart pounding, but my resolve only sharpened. They thought fear would silence me. They didn't understand that fear was now my weapon. And so I prepared for the next phase. I knew the Kingsleys wouldn't just fight back in courtrooms or newspapers anymore. They would fight in ways that left scars you couldn't see. And if I was going to survive, I needed to stay 2 steps ahead. So let me leave you with this thought: have you ever crossed a line so dangerous you knew life would never be the same afterward? That's exactly where I stood. And what happened next was something I could never have predicted. When the exposé detonated across every major news outlet, I thought the Kingsleys would retreat, lick their wounds, regroup quietly. I was wrong. They didn't hide. They came at me with everything they had. The first strike was financial. Overnight, my modest consulting firm lost nearly every client. Each one cited conflict of interest or reputation concerns, but I knew the truth: the Kingsleys had leaned on them, made calls, whispered threats. My income evaporated in less than a week. Then came the smear campaign. Articles appeared online labeling me a disgruntled mistress, a blackmailer, even a mentally unstable opportunist. Photos from years ago taken out of context splashed across gossip sites. Strangers on the street sneered. Some even spat words like liar or gold digger as I passed. It felt like my very identity was being stolen piece by piece. But what broke me wasn't the lies. It was the phone call I received late one night. Claire, a shaky voice whispered. It was Maria, one of Vivian Kingsley's former assistants, who had quietly slipped me documents. They know I helped you. I think they're following me. Before I could respond, the line cut. I tried calling back. No answer. To this day, I don't know what happened to her. That silence was a weight I'll never escape. I doubled down on my precautions. I stopped driving the same route twice. I avoided restaurants I used to love. Every shadow became an enemy, every noise a warning. Living like that corrodes you. You don't sleep, you don't trust, you just exist. Still, I refused to fold. I had one weapon left: persistence. I kept releasing documents to journalists feeding the fire. Each headline dug the Kingsleys deeper into public disgrace. And with every release, their rage grew sharper, more reckless. One evening as I left a late meeting, I felt the sensation of eyes tracking me. The parking garage was empty, too empty. My footsteps echoed, bouncing back at me. I quickened my pace. That's when I saw him. A man leaning casually against a black SUV, his gaze locked on me. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just smiled. That smile chilled me more than any threat could. I slid into my car, hands trembling as I jammed the keys into the ignition. My headlights swept across the concrete, and in that beam I saw it. Another man standing behind my car, blocking the exit. For a heartbeat, panic threatened to crush me. Then instinct took over. I slammed the car into reversed tires, screeching, forcing him to leap aside. I sped out of that garage like the devil was on my heels. My chest heaved, adrenaline roaring in my ears. They weren't just threatening anymore, they were closing in. That night, lying awake, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just about silencing me. This was psychological warfare. They wanted me broken, desperate, so I'd make mistakes. And the cruelest part, it was working. Yet even in that darkness, I clung to one truth predators overreach. When they think they own you, they expose themselves. And the Kingsleys were getting sloppy. So I began planning not just to defend myself, but to strike where it hurt most. I didn't know if I'd survive it, but survival wasn't the point anymore. The point was freedom. And freedom always comes with a cost. Tell me if you were in my shoes, knowing enemies this powerful were circling. Would you run, or would you stand and fight to the end? Leave your answer below, because what I chose next could have ended everything. Some nights when the city fell silent and only the hum of distant traffic kept me company, I would sit by the window and wonder if I had already lost. The Kingsleys had stripped me of clients, friends, and peace of mind. But then one thought would anchor me: if they're still chasing me this hard, it means they're afraid. Fear, I realized, was my leverage. That's when I decided to stop reacting and start orchestrating. I needed a plan so bold it would shake them at their core. The expose had rattled their empire, but it wasn't enough. To destroy predators like the Kingsleys, you had to pierce their illusion of control. My first step was gathering allies. Quietly, I reached out to others who had been burned by their power: a whistleblower. They'd bankrupted a journalist. They'd blacklisted even a former family driver who knew their routines all too well. Each came cautiously scarred by their encounters, but hungry for justice. For the first time in months, I wasn't alone. Together we built a strategy, not a frontal attack, but a web-tight, precise, inevitable. While journalists continued digging into their finances, I worked to expose their political puppets. The driver shared detailed notes of secret meetings, and the whistleblower had files proving illegal lobbying payments. Piece by piece, the puzzle formed. But this wasn't just about facts. It was about narrative. The Kingsleys had painted me as unstable, a liar. I needed to rewrite the story, so I agreed to a televised interview, my first since the scandal began. I still remember the studio lights hot against my skin and the quiet before the cameras rolled. Claire, the anchor, asked why risk everything against one of the most powerful families in America. I took a breath, steadying my voice, because power without accountability is tyranny, and I refused to live under tyranny. It wasn't just words, it was a declaration. And judging by the flood of messages that poured in afterward, people felt it. For the first time, public opinion began tipping in my favor. Hashtags trended, protesters held signs with my name. The Kingsleys weren't untouchable anymore. But victory has a dangerous scent. The moment you taste it, you risk overconfidence. And deep down, I knew the Kingsleys weren't finished. They were predators cornered, and a cornered predator is the most dangerous of all. One evening, as I reviewed documents with my team, a colleague leaned close and whispered, "Claire, what happens if this doesn't end with headlines? What if they come after you in ways you can't fight back?" Her question hung in the air. I didn't answer because, truthfully, I didn't know. My plan was daring, yes, but it was also a gamble. One misstep and everything could collapse, not just for me, but for everyone who had trusted me enough to join this fight. Still, I couldn't back down. I looked at her and said, "If we stop now, they win. And if they win, the next person they destroy might be you." Her eyes hardened. She nodded. The fight was no longer mine alone. It was ours. What none of us realized, though, was that the Kingsleys were preparing a countermove more vicious than anything yet. They weren't just planning to ruin my reputation. They were planning to erase me entirely. And that's where the story takes a turn no one, least of all me, could have predicted. Stay with me, because in the next chapter, the Kingsley's mask finally slips, and what lurks beneath is darker than I ever imagined. The Kingsleys had been wounded, but they were far from finished. And when predators feel their empire crumbling, they don't fight fair. They strike at the very core of who you are. It began with a letter. No return address, just my name scrawled across the envelope. Inside was a single photograph, me asleep in my own bed. The timestamp in the corner was from 2 nights earlier. My blood froze. They hadn't just followed me, they had been inside my home. That night I couldn't stay still. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow felt like a threat. Sleep became impossible. But more than fear, what churned in me was fury. They weren't satisfied with ruining my reputation. They wanted me to unravel completely. Days later, the real blow landed. A forged arrest warrant appeared online, complete with my name and photo, accusing me of wire fraud. It spread like wildfire. Even though it wasn't real, the damage was instant. Banks froze my accounts. Landlords refused rent payments. Friends distanced themselves, whispering that maybe the Kingsleys had been right all along. The Kingsleys weren't just trying to silence me, they were trying to erase me from existence, to make me a ghost before I was even gone. Still, I refused to vanish quietly. I gathered my team, spread the fake warrant across the table, and asked the only question that mattered: how do we turn this against them? The driver smirked bitterly. We let them dig their own grave. If they want to fabricate evidence, let's expose it. People will believe what they see, but they'll also believe what collapses under scrutiny. So we traced the document, pulling metadata, examining digital fingerprints. It was sloppy work, a rush job done in desperation. And there, hidden in the file's history, was the breadcrumb we needed: a Kingsley Legal Aid's username. Proof. Still, exposing this would be dangerous. It wasn't just about releasing information, it was about timing. Release too early, and they'd bury it. Wait too long, and I might not survive the next move. One evening, as I sat reviewing the evidence, I whispered into the darkness of my apartment, "Why me? Why not someone else?" And the answer came sharp and undeniable: because I hadn't broken yet. Because my refusal to bend was the greatest threat of all. That realization steeled me. If they wanted me erased, then I would carve my existence so deeply into history that no amount of money or power could scrub it out. But here's the truth I didn't share with my team. Not then, not yet. I had a plan that went beyond exposure. A plan that would put me face to face with the Kingsleys themselves. It was reckless, maybe suicidal, but it was the only way to end this once and for all. And as I prepared to take that step, I couldn't help but wonder, when the moment came, when their mask finally slipped, what would I see staring back at me? Tell me this: if you knew your enemies had the power to destroy you, but you also held the one piece of evidence that could destroy them, would you risk everything to confront them directly? Leave your thoughts. I want to know if you'd be braver than I was about to be. Because what happened next changed everything. I'd always imagined facing the Kingsleys in a courtroom backed by lawyers, journalists, and a wall of evidence. But when the moment came, it wasn't in a courtroom. It was in a glass tower downtown, 30 floors above the city, in a boardroom that smelled of leather and power. They had invited me. No summoned me with a message as cold as steel. Come alone. We can end this quietly. My team begged me not to go. Claire, it's a trap, they said. Of course it was. But it was also my only chance to look them in the eye, to see the monsters behind the empire I'd been battling for months. When the elevator doors slid open, I felt my pulse pound against my ribs. The boardroom was vast windows stretching floor to ceiling, the city sprawled beneath like a conquered kingdom. At the head of the table sat Victor Kingsley, flanked by his siblings. Their smiles didn't reach their eyes. Claire, Victor said smoothly, gesturing to the empty chair opposite him. You've been very persistent, but persistence can be dangerous. I didn't sit. You forged evidence. You sent people into my home. You tried to erase me. His smirk widened. And yet here you are, still breathing. That should tell you something. Every word felt like a game of chess. They wanted me rattled, desperate. Instead, I placed the folder on the table, the digital breadcrumbs, the proof of their forgery. Their eyes flickered just for a second. I had hit the nerve. You call yourselves untouchable, I said, my voice steady. But this shows the world exactly what you are. Criminals in suits. Silence, and then laughter, sharp mocking. Do you think anyone cares? One of the sisters sneered. Do you think people want the truth? They want security, they want power, and we are the ones who give it to them. It was a chilling moment realizing they believed their own lies. But before I could respond, Victor leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. You could walk away, Claire, right now. Take the money we offer, disappear. Live quietly, far from here. Or, he tapped the folder, you can push this and watch everyone you love burn with you. The threat was naked now, no more masks. And for the first time I felt the weight of what I was risking, not just my life, but the lives of those who had stood beside me. My hands trembled, but not with fear, with rage. You think fear will silence me? No, it will expose you. Fear is the language of tyrants, and I don't speak it anymore. The room crackled with tension. Victor's smile faltered. The others exchanged glances. For the first time I saw doubt in their eyes. But then the twist. A voice rang out from the corner of the room. She's right. I turned, and there, stepping from the shadows, was someone I never expected to see, an insider, one of their own blood, holding a flash drive. This has everything, the insider said, their voice shaking. Every payment, every threat, every crime. I can't be part of this anymore. The Kingsleys froze. The mask, the empire, the illusion, it all cracked in that instant. And as I stood there stunned, I realized this battle wasn't just mine anymore. Their own had turned against them. But betrayal cuts both ways, and what came next would prove just how dangerous it is to stand in the crossfire of a collapsing dynasty. The boardroom erupted like a glass cage, shattering from the inside. The Kingsleys leapt to their feet, their voices tangled in rage and disbelief, as the insider, shaking but resolute, placed the flash drive on the table. Victor's mask slipped entirely, his voice thundered raw and feral. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've doomed us all? But I knew better. They weren't doomed because of the flash drive. They were doomed because their empire was built on lies, and lies always rot from within. I stepped forward, sliding the folder with the forged warrant beside the flash drive. This isn't just the end of your power, it's the unveiling of who you really are. Everything you've stolen, every life you've broken, every threat you whispered in the dark, it all comes out now. For the first time I saw fear flicker in Victor's eyes, not rage, not arrogance, fear. The insider handed me the drive, their hands trembling. Take it. I can't do this alone. But you've already shown them you won't break. I pocketed it, my pulse steady now. The Kingsleys had tried to erase me, but instead I was standing in their sanctum, with the proof of their crimes. Walk out that door, Claire, Victor hissed, and you'll never know peace again. I met his glare head on. Peace was never the goal. Freedom was. Then I turned and walked out. My legs shook, but I didn't stumble. Every step was a declaration I would not be silenced. The days that followed were a blur of fire and storm. My team and I released the documents in waves. First the forged warrant, then the trail of payments, then the recordings of threats. Each drop was a bomb detonating beneath the Kingsleys' empire. News outlets swarmed. Politicians distanced themselves. Former allies turned into predators circling the wounded. The dynasty that had seemed untouchable only weeks before crumbled brick by brick until all that remained was dust and fear. But there was a cost. I lived under constant surveillance threats filling my inbox and echoing through every unknown number on my phone. Friends vanished too scared to stand beside me. Even sleep betrayed me, haunted by the memory of that photo on my nightstand, me asleep, vulnerable. And yet through all of it, I felt something I hadn't in months: strength. Not the strength of someone who never falls, but of someone who falls 100 times and still rises. One night as I looked out over the city from my small apartment, I whispered into the dark, "It's over," and for the first time I believed it. The Kingsleys had lost, not just their power, but their myth. They were no longer untouchable titans. They were just people broken, exposed, and left to face the ruins of their empire. And me, I wasn't erased. I wasn't a ghost. I was still here. And my story was louder than their silence. So if you've made it this far, hear me now. Power only wins when we surrender to it. But when you stand, when you refuse to bend, you take that power back. And if my story has reached you, maybe it's because you're stronger than you know. And if you want to hear another story where the truth cuts deeper than the lies, don't stop here. Click through to the next video. Trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next. The storm eventually faded, though the scars remained. I still carry the echoes of sleepless nights, the shadows that creep at the edges of quiet rooms. But alongside those scars lives something greater peace. Not the fragile peace the Kingsleys once dangled like a carrot, but the peace born of choice of survival, of knowing I never surrendered. I built a new rhythm, a life outside of their reach. Mornings spent walking through the park with coffee in hand, afternoons writing nights surrounded by the few friends who stayed through the fire. Each moment was small, ordinary, but it was mine. And perhaps that is the truest revenge. Not headlines, not scandal, not even justice in the courts. The truest revenge is simply living when they tried to bury you. Looking back, I don't see a victim. I see someone who refused to disappear. Someone who stood when the world wanted her silent. And if there's a lesson I've carried from all of this, it's that freedom isn't given, it's taken, seized by those willing to risk everything for it. So if you're listening to my voice right now, maybe you needed to hear this. Your voice matters. Your stand matters. And even when the powerful loom like giants, remember, they fall too. And when they do, the world doesn't end. Sometimes it just begins.